Hello again. This video is part of the week 2 module, and this week we will discuss the influence of philosophy on the development of psychology. We'll learn more about the contributions from the ancient Greek philosophers all the way up to philosophers in the 19th century. I like to start the semester off with a brief review of world history. Now, normally when we have class on campus, we would do this on the second day, we would do it in groups, and then we would explore the timeline together. Because this is now an online class, I've moved that experience to an online extra credit opportunity that you can find in week 1. But here is a sort of a summary of scientific advancement over the last 2,000, 3,000 years. You can see different time periods here, the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans. During the Christian Dark Ages, the level of scientific advancement was relatively low, and then the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, all the way up until modern day ages, which we call modern science. What is the difference between philosophy and physiology? The field of philosophy is focused on the study of knowledge, of abstract ideas, how they form, why they exist, where we learn them. Physiology is a more concrete science. Physiologists study the body and how different organs and different body parts function to help the organism survive. Let's go back briefly to the ancient Greeks and take a quick look at how they influenced the field of psychology. Although psychology was established in 1879, its roots go all the way back to the ancient Greek philosophers. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all studied the human mind and human behaviors centuries before psychology was even thought of. And they studied all kinds of topics. Things like, how do we learn? Why are some people different than other people? And how are they abnormal? They also studied memory, thinking, love, what happens after death. There's a variety of different topics that are associated with ancient philosophers. Most of those topics we still study today, but from a more scientific perspective. All 3 of these ancient Greek philosophers were alive several hundred years before the birth of Christ. Socrates was Plato's teacher. Plato was Aristotle's teacher. Socrates is known best for creating the Socratic method. It's the method of asking questions to draw out more questions, so that we can really understand an idea, a principle, an event from all perspectives. Socrates did not publish anything. We only know that Socrates existed through Plato's writings, which survived more than 2,400 years. We still have many of his original writings. Socrates was actually executed because the community felt like he was corrupting the youth with his progressive ideas. Again, Plato was Socrates' student and he was Aristotle's teacher. He's best known for writing about his ideas regarding the mind, the body, and the soul, and the connection between the 3 of them. Aristotle is best known for his emphasis on the experimental method, the idea that if you change one thing and observe what happened after the change, if you do that enough times, you can come to understand the relationships between variables better. These 3 philosophers contributed to what we call epistemology, the study of knowledge and its roots and its nature, how we acquire it, and what is knowledge? What do people know? Epistemology is part of philosophy. Their contributions contributed to the foundation of not only psychology, but also modern science and philosophy as well. Centuries later, Copernicus, Vesalius, and Bacon also contributed their ideas. Some historians suggest that modern science was born in the 1500s, specifically in 1543 after two events occurred. First, Nicholas Copernicus published his heliocentric view of the universe. He was the first to publish his ideas about the sun as opposed to the earth, the sun being the center of the universe. Andreas Vesalius also published his work about the anatomy of the human body, which was the first full-length, comprehensive book detailing the human body's anatomy. A few decades later, Sir Francis Bacon was influential in popularizing the scientific method. He did this during the time when we were transitioning from the Renaissance period to the age of the Enlightenment. And Bacon was an English philosopher and statesman. He was involved in politics in England, but he was also a big fan of the scientific method, and he spoke about it, wrote about it, and encouraged others to use a more scientific approach to observe the world, as opposed to the traditional spiritual explanation for why things are the way they are. Bacon is also known as the father of empiricism, which is the idea that knowledge is gained through experience, reflection, learning, the environment. Empiricist starts with an E, experience starts with an E. I try to remember that connection using the letter E. Bacon also advocated for a more inductive approach to studying the world. Up until this point, deductive reasoning was the prominent way of studying the environment. Deductive reasoning is going from a very general concept down to something very specific, whereas inductive reasoning starts with specific observations about the world, about the people you see, the animals you see, and draws broad conclusions about those specific events. In the 17th century, two more philosophers, Descartes and Locke, both made contributions to psychology. Keep in mind that in the 1600s, the Catholic Church's authority began to diminish, and scientists began to break away from the church and come up with their own ideas about the origin of the world and how things came to be the way that they are. At this time, there was also a spirit of mechanism. Mechanists said that humans operate very much like complex machines. And individuals like Hobbes, Harvey, Descartes, Newton, they tried to describe humans like machines in mechanical terms. Not only were philosophers and scientists thinking about the world in terms of machines, but the public, the general public, was also very much interested in likening things to machines. Why? Because machines and some of the inventions that you use every day were beginning to be invented 1500, 1600, 1700s. René Descartes, it's probably a name you've heard before. It's pronounced Descartes. He was a French philosopher and mathematician. He was raised in the church by fairly strict parents. By the time he reached age 18, his curiosity about the world led him to leave the church and begin to study the world from his own perspective. Interestingly, he spent his entire life afraid of retribution from the church. He was afraid that they would try to make him look bad, hurt his reputation, say things about his family members. So he did not publish his work until after his death. He had other people publish his work so that the church could not come after him. Keep in mind, too, that in the 1620s, at about the time that Descartes was active and publishing his work, Galileo Galilei and Sir Isaac Newton were also perfecting their theories. All three of these individuals relied on philosophy, math, and science to develop their ideas. Descartes promoted what we call dualism, this idea that the mind interacts with the body. He's also known for modeling. He did this using numbers. He was a mathematician, so you see he has lots of formulas and he refers to different parts of the body using letters and numbers instead of phrases. In the 1600s, there were also a few other ideas floating around, starting to take hold. Descartes had a role in popularizing rationalism and nativism. Rationalists said knowledge develops from reason and logic. Plato and Socrates were fans of the more rationalistic approach. Remember, empiricists say knowledge develops from experience. Rationalists believed knowledge comes from thinking about information and learning in that way. Nativists said that some knowledge is actually innate, that all humans are born with some information. Plato was also a supporter of this idea. Descartes had some interesting ideas about the human mind and behaviors. He was wrong about some of these ideas, but he was one of the first individuals to promote these ideas. That is why he ends up in our psychology textbook. Descartes believed that humans have minds and animals do not. He was not talking about the brain, he was talking about the abstract mind, what we call psychology today. Descartes suggested that humans can control their reflexes while animals cannot. And one of his most interesting ideas is the idea of animal spirits. Descartes believed that reflexes work through these animal spirits. And animal spirits are these tiny particles in our blood that send signals from our body to our brain about how we need to respond. So you see in the image here, it's one that's commonly associated with Descartes. In order for the human to understand that the hot fire is hot, these animal spirits have to travel throughout our body to send those signals. His ideas led other people to test those ideas and come up with more accurate ways of representing human psychology. John Locke is another philosopher. He was trained as a physician. In the late 1600s, he disagreed with Descartes' rationalism and instead promoted Bacon's empiricism. He also emphasized the use of the scientific method, and not only the scientific method in a general sense, but experimentation as well. One of John Locke's most long-lasting ideas in the field of psychology is his idea that all humans are born as blank slates, that humans learn what they learn through experience, their environment, their interactions with other people. Locke attempted to describe the structure of the mind. He said that ideas are the basic elements of the mind, and these ideas come from our interaction with our environment, from sensation, perception, and also from reflection, from thinking about the different things that we experience in our environment. He did acknowledge, however, that the fear of pain and the loss of pleasure were two types of knowledge that all humans understand at birth. So although he said we were blank slates except for these two things. Locke is also well known for promoting associationist ideas. This perspective suggests that the active mind is operating by forming associations between the things that we're experiencing in our life. The temperature, the lighting, the intensity of the sound, but also in terms of timing. One of the greatest contributions of Locke's work has to do with his educational philosophy. You will recognize some of these ideas because they are ideas that we still adhere to today. Locke believed in the importance of children's physical health and their ability to learn. So he promoted ideas about breakfast, lunch, physical exercise. He also suggested that parents and educators avoid the use of punishment when trying to help children learn. He said that punishment made things worse, not better. And he was a big promoter of using verbal praise to encourage children, reward children, and also motivate them to continue learning. He also contributed some ideas to politics, to our modern view of politics. In the 1800s, Berkeley was one of the most well-known philosophers. Bishop George Berkeley was an Irish philosopher and a proponent of empiricism, the idea that knowledge is gained through life experience. Berkeley suggested that our beliefs about the external world depend on our perception of it. What this means is that we don't necessarily have to see an object ourselves to believe that it exists. It is possible that we can make judgments and learn to understand a particular object, situation, event through others' experience, not necessarily through direct perception of those events. David Hume was a Scottish philosopher. He was also an empiricist. He suggested that it isn't even possible to come up with a theory of reality or to truly understand reality. He also had this idea that the mind does not create thoughts, ideas on its own, that these ideas only come from perception. Hume proposed 3 different laws to explain how ideas are formed. Resemblance is the idea that when you see something, when you see, say, a picture of the Grand Canyon, the visual representation of the Grand Canyon is what gives you the idea about the Grand Canyon. It's what prompts your recall of that visit, that object in the world. Temporal contiguity has to do with how events are spaced in time. Many of you, when you see lightning, you anticipate the thunder coming after, partly because through experience, you know that's what happens. Lightning comes first, then the thunder comes second. Hume proposed that when individuals first see that lightning, the visual of the lightning causes a response. They don't actually have to experience the thunder yet. The lightning is enough to cause the reaction. How did Mill and Leibniz contribute to psychology in the 19th century? John Stuart Mill was also a philosopher and an economist in the 1800s. He is well known for his rejection of commonly held attitudes about women at the time. He actually introduced a voting rights bill to Parliament in 1866 and was a big supporter of the education movement in the mid-1800s. In 1843, he published what is one of his most well-known works in the field of psychology, A System of Logic. Mill had some ideas about how principles from the natural sciences could be applied to ideas in psychology, not only legitimizing the field, but also contributing to an all-around better understanding of human psychology. Here are 3 of Mill's principles. The method of agreement looks for common elements in multiple cases or multiple events of some phenomena. The method of difference looks for an element that is present when an event occurs, but not present when that event does not occur. His method of concomitant variation was an early version of correlations, the idea that 2 variables can increase together and decrease together, and that we can represent that relationship in an abstract form. Let's look at an example. Imagine we predict that having a flower garden will reduce stress. Using the method of agreement, we would expect everyone, or nearly everyone, who has a garden to have low levels of stress. Using the method of difference, we would expect everyone, or nearly everyone, without a garden to have high levels of stress. So it's that idea that when the garden is not present, the outcome, low levels, is also not present. So in the absence of a garden, a human would have high levels of stress. The final philosopher we'll talk about today is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He was a German philosopher and mathematician. He is best known for publishing his ideas about different levels of awareness. He was one of the first to label unconscious perception. He called it petite perception, the idea that we can perceive things without actually being aware that we're perceiving them. He called the highest level of awareness hyper-awareness, being in the moment and perceiving all that is around you. He called that the apperception. He also argued that the human mind has innate properties that allow us to be truly human and experience the world in the way that we experience it. He said that only animals are truly born as blank slates. He did not believe that humans were completely blank. He suggested the human mind is more like veined marble, and I have a picture here of veined marble. He said that the veins in the marbling represent our innate predispositions. You can start to see how their ideas were birthing the ideas that we all learn about readily in our psychology classes today. That is all for our week 2 lecture. Next week, we will look at the impact of physiology on the development of psychology.